Hi everyone, I'm Zen, your astrologer, and welcome to another pick a card reading with the subject, What is my deepest wound? Even though this is a timeless reading, as in it's not really attached to any time frame, the subject is not really coincidental because right now we have a Chiron and Ceres conjunction which represent our wounds, but also how we heal them, how we nurture ourselves back to equilibrium. So during this period, a lot of us might experience resurfacing wounds, bad memories, traumas of everything that has hurt us, everything that basically blocked us in life. So maybe a lot of people will find a little bit of extra strength, extra faith, extra determination to stay on their healing path through this pick a card reading. The instructions are very simple. Just look at the 5 pile of cards for a couple of seconds or as long as you need, then choose the one which appeals to your intuitive senses the most, and afterwards just jump straight to the interpretation. The timestamps for the 5 piles can be found in the comments below, but also in the description of the video. For those of you who have chosen the first pile, your cards are the Death reversed, the Ace of Pentacles, and the Wheel of Fortune. Now, before I begin, I must say that this is a really tricky combination of cards because it speaks of so very many things. It is very difficult for me to filter it out and place it into timelines, if you know what I mean. So even this first pile can mean different things for different people, but it is perhaps the way the healing and the regeneration takes place in your life is the common element to everyone. So the Death reversed opens this reading, and this means more than one thing. First of all, it represents the past and the wound itself, which is also ancestral, meaning that one way or another, that energy, that fated energy, in order for events in your life to come together in such a way for you to receive the wound, was kind of programmed into your genes because your ancestors, for example, grandparents, their parents, or it could be your parents, received a lot of wounds. Their lives were really, really tough and challenging, either materially or emotionally. Maybe they had to go through abandonment, or maybe they were part of some kind of global crisis, for example, First World War, Second World War, anything, the Holocaust, anything which had to do with a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity, where one might feel that the universe, the divine God itself abandoned them. But as I said, this is not really your life. This is the wound of your ancestors. This was a fear, this was an energy that you carried within yourself. And perhaps it wasn't you personally who was wounded the most by this, but it might be your parents or your grandparents. So basically it was a collateral suffering. Now another way to look at this death card is that for some of you, this karmic wound manifested in your life as losing someone very dear. Maybe a parent, a beloved grandparent, maybe a child. It could also be a partner, a life partner. But it doesn't have to be physical death. It can also be, for example, like a really complicated, twisted, and hyper-emotional divorce. For other people, maybe the wound itself wasn't very clear. Maybe it wasn't really tied to a specific event. Maybe it was just like a seed of depression, which basically ran their lives And maybe the same seed of depression was basically part of the whole family. So everyone was a little bit pessimistic. Everyone saw life, and everyone's life views and philosophies were, realistic, but in an extreme way. So perhaps in your younger years, hope was kind of missing from your life. Or maybe this can represent a history of depression, mental health problems, maybe suicidal tendencies. For others still, because of this ancestral wound, this played out as a really unfavorable material situation which kind of followed you like a shadow. It didn't matter how well you did, what you did, how you did it. Life basically, or karma or faith, didn't materially reward you as it should have, or even if the reward, the income was there, you kind of lost it. Either you gave it away or something happened and the money, the resources, the material comfort just disappeared. And also for other people, it wasn't necessarily money, but it was some kind of physical illness, maybe something which has to do with the bones, maybe which has to do with the digestive tract, blood chemistry, as in some kind of long-term physical imbalance, disease, discomfort, etc. But of course this death card just marks the wound, and it marks the past and the circumstances, how it played out in your life. The good part is that because it's reversed, I wouldn't actually say that it's healed, because, this runs really, really deep. What I can actually say is that it's alchemized. The death card is the symbol of Scorpio, which is the sign of alchemy and what we do with our unconscious energies, including traumas and everything that we inherited. So basically this means that even if it's not healed in this proper sense, it is transformed. You look at it with understanding. You know why it happened. You were able to forgive. You were able to move on with your life. It has a lot of inner work. For some people, it can also represent going to a therapist, going to a specialist, a spiritualist, even a priest or a cleric. But not necessarily. This is something you could also have done by yourself. But the essence is that after you understood it, after you kind of accepted it that this happened and you cannot change it, the only option is to move on and not allow this to stay alive in your heart. Like for example, for those people for whom this trauma, this ancestral wound played out as losing someone who you love dearly, but there is a massive difference, because there can be losing someone due to natural causes like a disease, an illness, but if that special someone was a victim of suicide, well then that wound was so very deep and profound that basically your whole existence gravitated around it. So for you guys who had this version, recovery, regeneration, and moving on was so very hard that maybe only now, only in the present, are you able to actually say that you're alchemizing all of this. And another thing which is extremely important, well, maybe you had the tendency to blame yourself, or what could you have done differently, but you had to also accept that basically there was absolutely nothing either that you could fault yourself with, blame it on yourself. There was nothing you could do. This was basically just part of your life, something that you just couldn't have avoided. And maybe perhaps this part of the recovery, alchemizing this trauma, was the hardest, that you were just there and that's it. But this is where the rest of the cards, the Ace of Pentacles and the Wheel of Fortune, speak about your recovery and also the future. As you heal, as you alchemize, and a lot of people who have chosen the first pile have already mountains of inner work and healing, acceptance, forgiveness, being able to simply process everything behind them. So naturally the Ace of Pentacles represents that their normality is also changing. You are tasting what life, physical existence, your life story feels like without that wound being the core of everything. So this is where you see and can experience that without that massive trauma, well, life isn't as doomy and gloomy. Life is actually quite beautiful, or at least there are a lot of beautiful, pleasurable, magical, and deeply spiritual moments in life which you can enjoy without guilt, without thinking about the losses and everything. And the Wheel of Fortune, well, on one hand, it speaks about a karmic contract. So basically, even before you were born, you accepted to live this through because you're just helping your family purge the tragedies of the distant past. As I said, your grandparents and their parents, and perhaps going even further than that, out of your genes, out of your soul matrix. This is the lifetime when the cycle ends, when future generations, as in genetically speaking, of course, your children, or the children of your siblings, or cousin, the future of your family, even if you are someone who doesn't have children or doesn't want to have children, you are still purging the family's karma from the tragedies of the past, from that massive suffering and hopelessness. And of course you are doing this together even if you have no knowledge of this. And on the other hand, that Wheel of Fortune represents that life is gonna turn around, that things are definitely not gonna stay the same, because what you suffered, regardless if it was losing someone or if you were born with this depressive or suicidal tendencies, or if it was a physical illness, or however that ancestral trauma manifested. Now, living and experiencing like that is kind of unusual. So that is exactly why after this healing journey progresses, you have to experience the other side of the spectrum, as in something totally wonderful, miraculous, something so positive and meaningful for you personally, which very few people out there may experience in this lifetime. So it's like a double-sided coin. You got the worst, and of course, your future reserves something which is just as unique, just as strong and powerful as your trauma was, but in the opposite way. But when that happens, when that takes place in your life, actually it's not even an event. It is just a state of being. It is just almost like exiting one personal dimension and entering into a new one. So it's basically a phase in life when things will take a different turn. For example, everything that you do will be lucky. The people who you come across will be very supportive and kind. Everyone will basically promote your well-being. Or whatever you have lost is going to be replaced. But I know that if it's a person who you lost, you cannot actually say that you can replace it. But just look at this from a karmic perspective. The energy is going to be replaced. And last but not least, the Wheel of Fortune is the symbol of Jupiter. So it is the divine gateway, the blessing. You're really not alone in this. You never were. Of course, in the past, especially the periods of your life when that trauma, the wound was very active and powerful, you couldn't perceive the divine, being present in your life in the most delightful and positive way. Maybe quite the contrary, you perceived it as a malevolent presence because why did it permit things to happen the way they happened? But everything is already changing. This is where the divine is a benevolent presence in your life. It supports you. It is there right beside you in dreams, in your heart, in your feelings. It is just replacing, even quite physically, genetically, those energies which you have purged out. So you're rewriting not just your destiny, but also your identity, your story, who it is that you are and what you are meant to live, experience in this life. So it is really, really positive. But truth be told, the death reverse is that kind of wound which never disappears. The maximum, it turns into a scar which reminds you of how strong you are, which humbles you, which highlights all your virtues. So that's the essence of alchemy. But of course you're still going to have down moments in life, you're still going to have memories and dreams, but whenever you have down moments, just remember how much you changed already, how much you turned your life around, how much you nurtured and helped your soul to get out of the quagmire, and that will never ever stop. The divine made a promise to your soul that it will support you, it will be there for you every time you ask for help. So especially in the down moments, in the melancholic moments, please remember this. Just ask for help and it will come. For those of you who have chosen the second pile, your cards are the Temperance, the World, and the Five of Swords reversed. It is the Temperance card, which speaks about the wound, which is more like an imbalance. It is something which happened to you at a very early age. So basically it was deeply imprinted into your mind, into your consciousness, into your unconscious as well, of course. And it can symbolize the following situations. The first type of wound that it can represent, well, it goes back to your childhood, where you might have had someone alcoholic or someone suffering from addictions in your family, or even if it wasn't like a substance, they might have had a psychological imbalance. They might, for example, a violent parent, someone who wasn't really taking care of their family, so someone who really shocked you with a bad example. So it can be like a bad family pattern which really marked you, shocked you. So naturally, it, alchemized your childlike innocence in the worst possible way, as in twisted and turned your childlike innocence, and your worldview was blackened, darkened. In other cases, it can also represent that maybe it's not necessarily your family, it can also be simply society, the community, the school and education, everything that you picked up from school, from your teachers. Maybe they were very strict, or maybe the type of education you received was so very unlike you, it just didn't resonate with your soul, and it felt very, very forced, it felt trapped, it was basically telling you through every possible means, especially when you were so very young, that it's not okay to be yourself, that it's not okay to do things your way, that you have to perform, to behave, anything like that in a certain socially acceptable way. For other people, it was maybe their sexuality which was the biggest problem, because it wasn't accepted or they had to hide it. And the last case scenario, well, the Temperance card is the astrological correspondent to the sign of Sagittarius, so that can mean religion and religious dogma. Maybe your family, or for many people even which has nothing to do with their families, maybe it's out of their own choice or fascination, you were sucked into the worst kind of religious dogma, which was extremely strict, and everything that was normal, natural, it made it seem like it's a sin. And every time you did something, for example, everything that brings pleasure in life, small pleasures or small mistakes, when people are young, they have to experience life in all of its colors and all of its expressions, so making mistakes is something natural, something actually to be desired, because that is how children, young people learn. But because of this religious pattern or dogma, everything seemed like a sin, and that really, really impacted you in a very negative way. But on the other hand, the Temperance card also speaks about the ways in which the wound affected your life. So perhaps you turned to substances or any kind of escapism in order to just block out those patterns. For other people, you rebelled all your life against society, social norms and standards, and you did everything in your power to dissociate yourself from it, sometimes in a very radical way. And other people just simply couldn't express themselves, they couldn't believe in themselves, they couldn't see anything good in themselves, they always thought that they were dumb, that they were the ugly duckling, that they were unworthy, so that had a massive impact on you. And of course, it kept making your life harder, ruining your life. It draw a lot of bad people, wrong crowds, toxicity, and sometimes it was even your own toxicity, but it's totally understandable because you had to wake up to who you are without the bad examples, without the programming, or if it was your parents, that you were not your parents. You had to dissociate yourself from your roots, from your family, from your move out, for example. And even though it was really, really hard and painful, because it wasn't just the mind that you had to convince to do things and see things and process things differently, but also the unconscious and the emotional world. So that took a lot of years of hard work and being consistent and not abandoning yourself, making difficult choices. And if it's addiction, well, it's almost self-explanatory how hard it is. But sometimes negativity, self-load, low self-esteem is almost like an addiction in itself. So it wasn't easy whatsoever. But the World card suggests that either you truly turned your life around 180 degrees and now you are someone who is authentically healed, and whenever you look back at the past, well, it's not doom and gloom and you don't take it as a big drama, you don't blame yourself, but you see it as a source of soul level, psychological, emotional maturization process. It had to play out that specific way in order to make you who you are and to turn you extremely self-sufficient, to highlight all your strengths and virtues. And this radical difference between that wounded and vulnerable young person or child perhaps and who you are today, that is just like a testimony of your titanic, monumental inner work, how very, very strong and powerful you are. And also, you can never ever fall back into the same patterns because, as I said, the wound was so deep that you just can't turn back into that anymore regardless of what happens. So basically, The World card is Saturn, so the ability to trust yourself. The ability to love yourself, support yourself, be at your side, and just to be okay regardless what life throws at you. And even if you're maybe, let's say, you're not totally healed, you haven't totally turned your life around yet, the World card is imminent, as in that is definitely what is going to happen. Everything leads to there, and it cannot be stopped. So it's almost like a guarantee that you are definitely gonna get there, and very, very soon. But perhaps what is even more important is that Five of Swords reversed, because in upright position, it would represent all the negative effects of the trauma or the wound, as in negative self-talk, the shadow, the unfavorable, the ruthless, the wicked, the self-defeating inner voice which just puts you down, which gets you into trouble, or perhaps, the temptations, the irresistible grip and gravity of the wound wanting to replicate itself, repeat itself. But since it is in reverse position, well, you kind of learned from your own experience a lot about psychology, a lot about how the human mind functions, a lot of life experience, and you can immediately see the same patterns in other people who have the same stories, who have the same wounds, who are facing the same things that you have faced a long time ago. And what's more important is that, like it or not, or believe it or not, see it or not, but all of this turned you into a kind of healer, where I do believe that a part of your future is going to be you helping people going through the same things as you have, exactly because you have this deep understanding. Now, I'm not sure which shape or form it takes. Maybe you'll be part of a charity, maybe you'll start a charity, maybe you'll volunteer, maybe you will just be there in the lives of your friends, your social connections, your acquaintances. Maybe you will turn this into something professional, but either way, you will be a figure who will help people going through the same issues as you have, especially youth. So, be the change you want to see in the world. That is your future. And your own example that you have been through it and who you have turned into is going to be a very strong motivational power of example, basically, in order to help other people who are going through this. Because by seeing your example, that is already a projection of hope, that is already a guarantee that this person went through the same thing, maybe worse, and look who they are today, so I can do the same thing. And perhaps, the swords is mental energy, even in the most unfavorable position. So that can also mean writing your book or somehow immortalizing your experience, your life story, one way or another. For those of you who have chosen the third pile, your cards are the Ten of Cups, the Seven of Swords reversed, and the Queen of Cups. Now, this is a very unusual combination because the Ten of Cups suggests that you entered in this life, in this existence, not just with a clean karma, but actually with mountains of good karma, a lot of good deeds, a lot of really, really positive and good actions that you have performed in your previous existences. It might be the case that maybe in your past lives you've been like a doctor or a nurse or a midwife, a healer, someone in the service of others, maybe a cleric, a spiritualist. Anyway, you have lifetimes of dedicating your life to the greater good, serving others, serving the greater good, regardless what shape and form that takes. So naturally, you were born with a really strong desire to help other people, to nurture other people, to take care of other people. This also points to the fact that you might have a really strong empathic gift. You just know, you can sniff out when someone is in emotional pain, suffering. And also, this points to the fact that you're one of the ancient soul archetypes. So basically, you were born with a lot of knowledge and experience and a certain kind of maturity, a very strong spiritual connection to the source. And basically, this is way stronger than, for example, your survival instinct, your survival mentality. You instinctually put yourself second, as in put the needs and problems of other people first. You jump to help anyone, even total strangers. You might be a big animal lover, nature lover, and you have this very special thing about you where sometimes your sheer presence makes people feel a lot better. You have an aura of light-heartedness, as in you can uplift an entire crowd just by your laughter, just by your smile. You might also be very artistic, and many of these things just come to you naturally. It is you were just born with this wisdom, this knowledge, and it's deeply woven in your instincts. But how does all of this turn into a wound? Well, on one hand, because of your soul level desire to help, to be a supporter, to be someone who makes the world a better place ultimately. Naturally, you were born into a family who needed exactly that kind of child. So your service began from a very early age. Maybe you supported one of your parents. Maybe your parents divorced and you kind of were the mediator or the mature person as a child, and you gave emotional support to one of your parents, for example. So basically it was almost like the roles were reversed, and this speaks about just how powerful your soul is. Now, there is nothing wrong with that, because that is a valid source of experience. But, the excess of this good intention, the excess of this soul power, well, it leads to naivety, it leads to idealism, it leads to a certain kind of ignorance where you naturally have better said, because this is the past, the tendency to trust people, to allow, to not to say no, to say yes every time, to please other people, to make them happy regardless, not to judge anyone, to share everything, or basically self-sacrificial tendencies, a lot of self-sacrifice here. And your soul was so strong, there was nothing wrong with this. But as you started to get older, more mature, for example, when you started your professional life, and you became more independent, etc. So basically when society absorbed you into it, in a natural way, of course, because all of us have to make this move at one point in our lives. Now that is when your idealism kind of shattered, because you were this very giving person and you really believed in the greater good. You were the kind of person who wanted to save the world. You had big dreams, big goals. Like, for example purposes only, save the planet, save nature, save animals, shelter for the homeless, for young mothers. You believe that you can make the world a better place. And of course there's nothing wrong with that, But in this day and age, especially the era where you were born into, well, things don't actually work that way. Because you attracted a lot of toxic, narcissistic, egoistic people who kind of always used you to their advantage. They abused your goodwill. So naturally, your good intention and your desire to just help, to be there, to save and do good deeds. Well, you know the saying, the road to hell sometimes is paved with good intentions, and I think this is the main theme of your wound. You allowed people to kind of manipulate you with their wounds, with their vulnerability, until you became much more wounded and much more vulnerable than they were. Your ideals were shattered and broken one after the other. So you may have had a moment when you turned the other way, when basically your heart just froze, when the world that you saw horrified you. It was almost like gazing into the eyes of Medusa. You turned into stone. You just couldn't believe what was happening to you. And especially if you are a spiritual person and you had this very strong connection to spirit from birth, well, it was the opposite of your faith. It was opposite of that which you always knew on a soul level. So that left a massive impact on you. It was almost like not only did you turn to stone, but you shattered. So basically it was like falling into a pit full of hungry leeches. Life and society and the modern times with everything in it just drained the spirit and life out of you, and your faith broke. It shattered. It just almost drove you into a kind of spiritual insanity where you just could not believe in the greater good, because that is part of your soul matrix. You done that over many lifetimes. You were created for that, so you couldn't be who you are actually not. But the fact that physical reality showed you the opposite, that was a very bitter pill. And some of you might have been let down by someone who you loved and trusted with every fiber of your being. Other people might have been let down by your partner, while others still might simply have been let down by society because of their idealism, after all. So this Seven of Swords also represents that when you've been left down, left hanging, when your faith was shattered, you immediately turned against your soul. Your mind got really, really angry and said, well, hold on a minute. Why are you believing all of this ideals and the greater good when just open your eyes and look at physical reality? And since you're an empath, well, look how much filth, how much ego is in the hearts of men. What are you doing? And this conflict, this dichotomy, this paradox, like, it gave you years and years of depression and maybe suffering. And this is your wound. And if you're someone who is on a spiritual path, maybe that was a moment when you actually started exploring the darker side of this, where because your faith was shattered, you kind of saw that there is some kind of truth in darkness as well. But anyway, the Seven of Swords is reversed, so you broke free. You broke free from your wounds. You broke free from everything that shattered your faith, but at the same time, you also broke free from your idealism. It took you that very painful experience to basically align yourself to the day and age that we live right now. That high moral and spiritual and good intended goals and ideals and principles will never actually meet perfection. we live in an imperfect world, so everything in it has to be imperfect. And the essence of everything is trying to be your best every day, but also that involves saying no, that also involves protecting yourself, your energy, that also involves walking away, that also involves ignorance, because ignorance is bliss. And there are so very many people who you cannot help because they don't really want to be helped. They just ask for help, for the attention, for you to feed their self-victimization. So your eyes open to all of this. So society and people and, the times that we live in cannot trick you anymore. But that Ten of Cups is still a really powerful karmic gravity that you brought into this life with yourself. So a part of that still needs to manifest. So the story is definitely not over yet. The universe had to open your eyes to ground yourself, to balance out your idealism, that not everything is as it seems, and basically all of life and everything, especially in this day and age, just look at the internet, is an illusion. And because you know that, and because that means that your expectations and the way you process things and life and mental elements and relations with other people is on a very healthy scale right now, you are ready to tap into that Ten of Coins. Everything, all the power that you brought with you from previous existences, as I said, that is yet to enter your life. And that is the next chapter. After you were wounded and you've healed, it means that you learned the lesson, you learned the responsibility, you learned that there is only so much of you what you can share and what you are allowed to share, because ancient souls like yourself have to hide their true mystery from everyone. Only the divine can see who you truly are, no one else. So what follows is that Queen of Cups, which means profound soul nurture. And of course, to translate what this means, well, it's simple. Either it means that life partner, that soulmate, who is just like you and you can form an alliance. And when you do form that alliance, it's like a symbiosis. You will not need anyone else in your life. No society, no nothing. So everything that you will do, every single gesture of good intent will not even have to be reciprocal. It won't have to be mutual. You just do it because you want it. You do it because you can. You do it because you're that powerful. Or it can mean a community or a group of people, maybe a soul family, who can take you in and just provide you with everything that you need in order for you to grow and just be the powerful ancient soul that you were born to be. But of course, this Queen of Cups is very vague. We don't really know what she represents as in manifestation. All we know that is happiness. All we know that is spiritual, psychological, emotional, fertility, well-being, where you are, of course, the healer, but on the other hand, you're also supported and healed by others who are just like you. And as I said, you're just stepping into this phase of your life. For those of you who have chosen the fourth pile, your cards are the Six of Swords, the King of Swords, and the Two of Wands. Now, this situation is extremely special because none of these cards actually speak about a wound in its classical sense. Naturally, that doesn't mean that you were not wounded. You, of course, have a lot of wounds like everyone else in life. You might even have karmic wounds. You might even have ancestral wounds, something which sources from your family, bad childhood experiences, or traumatic events that happened in your life. But what these cards suggest is that none of that has any power, any grip over you. because you are so very intelligent, or there is something about you which is like very, very smart, very cerebral. It's almost like you were born with an inner computer, and this is the only way I can express what I see and what I'm channeling right now, where you process everything when it happens. So, the wound can be there, you can go through it, but because you process it, it doesn't remain in your unconscious, it doesn't get repressed so very deeply that it would impact you for the rest of your life. So basically, it never actually reaches your soul, because your mind can simply perceive it for what it is and process it there and then. So basically, your emotional world might be like a totally different dimension than your mental sphere. It is almost like you are a twin or a dual entity in one body or in one being. And this is exactly why the wound doesn't really appear as a classical wound. Like, let me just give you an example. Let's say someone really offends you, or let's say you trust someone and they let you down. Someone who you love dear like a parent says something really hurtful, and that should have a very big impact. And it does when it happens, but you process it so very, very quickly. You understand why they said it. You understand, well, look, they're just the human beings. Of course they make mistakes. Of course they have their own misconceptions and etc. So this ability of yours to understand things very, very quickly makes you so very different. And it's almost like emotionally you're a different person, or you're a different entity than what you are mentally. But this is the case when someone's biggest virtue, when this very unique thing about you, well, it's also maybe your biggest enemy. Because what this Six of Swords represents is that you're not just one step, but you're a lot of steps ahead of everyone. No one can actually understand you. No one can actually match your intelligence. No one can actually compare with your mind, your thoughts, your level of understanding and processing and going through reality. So this is where the wound might be something omnipresent in your life and not something you can heal, not something that maybe is susceptible to healing whatsoever, because it's almost like you're an outsider, almost like an alien, almost like you're an observer of the world, where the world is something totally different than what you are. And I don't really want to use the word superior here, but let me just give you an example. A crossword puzzle seems of a certain complexity to a 10-year-old, and it seems something totally different to a 50-year-old. So it's almost like mentally, you don't even come from this day and age, if this makes sense at all. And until this present moment, you couldn't actually find a good side to this uniqueness about yourself. And I'm not saying that it doesn't have any practical sides, because, with studies, with work, with creativity, problem-solving skills, coming up with plans, writing, speaking, communication, everything that might have to do with the intellectual sphere, well, of course, it is more than in your power, and of course, you're very good at it. But it doesn't really matter, because for you, it's boring. For you, it's like totally lacking stimulus. It's not what you want to do. It's almost like There is absolutely no motivation in using your intelligence like that. What you would really find exciting, what you would find motivating, what you would find like a valid investment of your energy is like philosophy, it is like quantum science or something which has to do with the future, anticipation, visionary. Maybe, I don't even know how to express it, science fiction which becomes science fact, or almost like a totally different way of perceiving the universe where you can see logic, rationality, interconnections in things which for other people are almost non-existent or non-evident. So what is your wound actually? Because I haven't said anything about that. But the reason for that is I needed to explain everything that I'm picking up, everything that I'm being shown, so to speak. So basically the wound is, well, on one hand, loneliness because there's no one like you, or if actually there might be others like you, but you cannot find them. You know for a certainty that they are out there. Maybe they even know each other. Maybe there is even a group, but you cannot find them no matter what you do. And this frustrates you so very much that it's almost like going insane. Sometimes you even question your sanity. Sometimes when you read through psychological articles, well, every disorder that you see written down there, you immediately find in yourself. But I do believe that you just know that you're some kind of genius, or you have a very special kind of intelligence. It is what it is, you have to accept it. But what you cannot really control is that your mind, especially even your physical brain, is very hyper. It is so very much hyper that sometimes it drains your physical energy. You feel so very fatigued and tired. It's almost like you're being blocked physically in life. The other side of this is restlessness, anxiety, where your nerves just work themselves up and this feeling of electricity running through your body, it just almost attacks your stomach, your digestive tract. And naturally, sometimes, not always of course, you find it impossible to focus, to concentrate on one thing. So maybe you experienced hardships to hold down a steady job because after a while everything seems unbearably boring to you. And if you would explain this to another person, they would say, what's wrong with you? Boredom is not the end of the world, but for you it is. And also you might really love science fiction. You might love alternative reality if that makes sense to you. And that might have been an addiction at one point in your life. And now what to do? Well, first of all, the King of Swords. Like it or not, but you have to find some way to ground yourself. And nature, spending time in nature, spending perhaps time with animals or plants, life, living beings, has a very beneficial effect on you. And the other thing that you must do, well, the King of Swords is a master of his intellect, which means self-discipline. You have to find the techniques, one which works for you, because there are so many out there, which silences your mind and can control that anxiety and hyperactiveness. Maybe it's meditation, but maybe it's the kind of meditation where you don't sit still, you move a lot, maybe you do physical exercise. Or maybe you can channel this into some kind of creativity, but one which has a physical element to it. So in other words, don't leave your mind alone to do as it wants. Focus it on something like painting or mixing colors, or even if you have no talent whatsoever, just the sheer sake of doing it can help you. And ultimately, this two of wands. Now, what this means is that you need to connect to someone out there who is just like you, but learned how to master themselves. You might know this already. You might be searching for this already. You might even be telling me mentally that I'm not really helping you by telling you everything that you know already. But this is also fated. So don't give up hope. Don't give up searching for this person, this group of people, or this man, or whatever this, whoever this is. Because on one hand, it's out there. And the key to connecting, to making this happen, as in you meeting whoever it is that you need to meet, is uniting the emotional with the mental. Because, as I said, emotionally, you live in a totally different dimension than mentally. So as soon as you truly accept yourself for who you are, for how unique you are, and you just stop your mind, your mental sphere, from searching, from trying to analyze all the possibilities, and just insert this simple command line that you are finding them. You need to know that this is certain as the air you breathe, which supports your life. Because you can imagine that with your strong mental abilities, your doubts immediately become very, very strong and potent blockages. So you must stop your mind from working against you. You must stop the doubts. You must stop the what ifs. You must stop living through other people's logic, even if other people's logic is accepted. It is the empirical science, so to speak, even if that is what certain people call reality and down-to-earth way of thinking. You just have to stop doubting yourself, because if you have this ability to see through the illusion with the power of your mind and intellect, opposed to other people who do this with the power of their spirits or emotional strength and maturity, for you it is the mind, the eye of your mind. So that is what's true for you. And as your doubts wane, as your doubts fade away, that reality, which you know that has to just create itself, well, it will, like clockwork, like a puzzle, almost as a certainty. But you need to control your doubts. You have to need to control the power of your intellect. You have to embody the King of Swords. So take responsibility for every single thought, especially making sure that nothing that is alive in your mental sphere works against you. For those of you who have chosen the fifth pile, your cards are the Queen of Wands reversed, the Fool reversed, and the Hanged Man. Now, before I begin, I just have to mention that you are someone with incredible emotional and psychological strength and fortitude. Yes, you are very vulnerable, but you also have this strong psychological power to regenerate yourself very, very quickly. What we call in astrology the scorpionic gift, arising from your ashes like a phoenix. And you might have had moments, episodes, karmic cycles like this playing out in your life many times, where you just allowed yourself to burn to ashes and then discard the past, even discard your past identity, who you thought you were, and just begin anew, start a fresh page, etc. So this also has a lot to do with your wounds, because certain wounds are already swept away, the ashes. Certain hurts and pains and traumas, bad experiences, failures, disappointments, well, of course they took place in your life, and it doesn't even matter if they're ancestral or karmic or self-inflicted or the influence of other people. You basically shed them off like a snake sheds off its skin, and they're just chapters of the past, a memory, and that's about it. So what I'm saying here is you're really not that kind of person who is very easy put down by emotions, by hurts, pains, and traumas. You can rise above. And you might not even see yourself in a very valid and authentic light, because you might think that this is like normal. You might think that, well, everyone can do this, but the truth is not everyone. If you could actually very objectively compare yourself and the situations you went through in life with those of other people, well, some people ended up very, very badly. For some people, sometimes it was the end of the line. For others, the wound remained. For others, still it turned them so very bitter, sour, dark. So, first of all, you don't really know your own strength, your ability to regenerate psychologically and just to be reborn, to shed off the reminiscence of the past and everything is remarkable. But there might be one element or one wound, let's say, which may not be a wound in itself. It's more like a very strong frustration. It is almost like an inner pressure which you could never release, which you could never just shed off, you could never let go. It followed, it was part of each and every one of your rebirths. It remained in your core, and it has to do with the inner child. Well, first of all, this very strong regenerative skill or power or whatever that you have is fueled by the inner child, who is extremely potent, who is extremely strong. You know, the Peter Pan, most of your magic, most of who it is that you are, your innocence, your beauty, everything that makes you distinctive and special, well, that is your you are your inner child more than you could possibly imagine. Identity and who you present yourself to be in society is more like a construct which you build up in each cycle. You are also very chameleonic. You can just, fit into anywhere you want. You're very versatile. You're very adaptable. And maybe none of this is conscious. You might not be aware of all of this. But the secret to who it is that you are is that your inner child takes everything in life just as a play, as a game, as an adventure. And when the game turns bad, the inner child just sheds it off. It says, enough with this game, let's start a new one. And this might be the reason why you also have problems committing to something very long term. May that be a job, a career, or a relationship. I'm not saying that you're not able to commit, but when you do commit, it's almost like frustrating. You don't like it. You don't agree to it inside the core of your soul, so to speak. You really, really don't like situations, people, contracts, scenarios which take away your ultimate freedom. And when all of this frustration, not being able to live free, not being able to play your game, to rest when you feel like resting, to go adventuring when you feel like going adventuring, to find playmates out there, other children, as in people who embody their inner child, well, then is when the frustration can turn into a depression, it can turn into vengeance, so to speak. And the reason why this energy can become so imbalanced from time to time is because perhaps in your childhood, your maternal figure or your parents or someone may have responsibilized you prematurely, or they may have shared they're cross with you, they're hurt, they're pain, they may have leaned on you emotionally, especially if there's divorce in your family or a single parent. And that was like a two-edged blade, because the inner child loves with all its heart, especially the parent, but they also felt guilty and responsible that their parent is going through such a hard time because they are born, because they exist. And this feeling of helplessness where how can a child actually help and do something? And even if you know all of this, even if you rationally see this picture very clearly and you accept it, yet still it is the energy which hurts you, the inner energy which you owe to yourself to enact. Translated, well, it means that the inner child just wants to be a child. It couldn't live life as it wanted to in childhood, and that's absolutely fine. You're not the only one. Life is hard for everyone. It is, part of life. We all have our own obstacles. But of course, as I said earlier, well, Peter Pan never grows up really, does he? And since you are a symbolic Peter Pan, what you actually need to do is embody the energy of the hangman. Usually that would be a stuff of nightmares for other people. But for you, that is basically paradise, because it means always being, existing, living life from your own world, your own bubble. Life is your game. Life is your chessboard. You make your own schedule. You live life the way you want to live it. Sometimes you desire chaos, where there is a lot of uncertainty in your everyday routines, as in you don't know what you're gonna do in an hour, and that's absolutely fine and pleasurable. Other times you have a routine and you just wanna hold it, you just wanna stick to it because it makes you so very comfortable, it makes you safe, protected. Sometimes you just wanna go out and play with other children, so to speak, with other Peter Pans, because you might know some people in your life who are very similar to you, and you do understand each other quite well. Other times you just want to be alone and do your own thing. Maybe actually play real games, computer games, or just your hobbies, or whatever makes you happy. And ultimately, where all of this is leading you to is, on one hand, not to feel guilty for this. There is nothing wrong with this. It's not immature. It is definitely not living life without a responsibility or sense of duty. Life kind of taught you that in a very profound way. So you're someone who keeps their promises. You're someone who is very reliable. Given that you're free, that you're able to do things your way in your time and just breathe. And at the same time, the reason why you have to create this kind of life for yourself to support the inner child, well, just look at certain elderly people who never ever stopped living their dreams, who never ever stopped just enjoying life with a very innocent, light-hearted way, and their happiness lasts until the very last breath, and you are definitely gonna be one of those people. And when the inner child can have that kind of freedom, mental, psychological, emotional, and of course material as well, but it is not the material part of things which matters the most. Just to be able to be yourself, well, that is the moment when all that inner fire, that frustration, when not being able to express yourself is gonna stop being a burden, stop from time to time periodically ruining your life, your joy of life, your experience of life, and ultimately that is when you will stop shedding your skin, because you won't need any constructed identity, you won't need any adaptation, you will just be that inner child who you truly are, and end of story. Well, thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you for all your love, all your support, all your beautiful comments, and of course your generosity. And if you'd like to support my channel, feel free to donate. You can find the PayPal link in the description below. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, bye for now.